Riftwalkers Radio is waiting for you.
Just step through the rift.
And discover a world of fantasy like you've never heard before.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're diving into a world of werewolves and forbidden romance, and this deep dive is all thanks to you. You guys sent in some sources on Enemy Mate, a book by Karen Santos, and I gotta say, I'm already intrigued.
It's a pretty interesting genre, isn't it? For paranormal romance, I think there's something about those supernatural elements that just make the drama so much more intense.
Yeah.
And it gives us a chance to explore like our deepest desires and fears, but in a way that feels safe.
Yeah.
Even exciting.
Yeah, totally. So from what I've been able to piece together from these book summaries, Enemy Mate basically revolves around two werewolf packs that are at war, the Midnight Moon Pack and the Red Blood Pack. And get this, they're not only divided by, their rivalry, but they're also separated geographically. The Midnight Moon Pack is up north, and they're described as like caring and noble, whereas the Red Blood Pack is down south, and they're known for being ruthless and vengeful. What do you think about that north-south thing? It feels like there's got to be more to it than just geography,
Oh yeah, for sure. It definitely adds another layer to the whole conflict. It makes you wonder if the author is maybe trying to draw some parallels to real-world conflicts, like historical conflicts, or even some of the cultural divides we see today. Think about the history of North versus South in America, the Civil War, all the cultural differences, even the tensions that still exist today. Do you think this could be like a subtle way of exploring those same themes, but in this fantasy world?
I like that. And like the pack rivalry wasn't enough, the story throws in this forbidden love trope too. We've got Charlotte, the 17-year-old daughter of the Midnight Moon Alpha, and Aiden, the 21-year-old Alpha of the Red Blood Pack. Forbidden love is just such a powerful element in romance, right? Because it automatically creates conflict and tension. It makes you root for the couple, even when you know their love is pretty much impossible. But it also gets you thinking about the boundaries and expectations that shape our lives and relationships.
Absolutely. And the stakes are even higher in this case. Because Aiden is driven by this desire for revenge. He wants to get back at the Midnight Moon Pack for the death of his parents. So not only is their love forbidden by their pack loyalties, but it's also all tangled up in this like deep-seated hatred and desire for vengeance. It really makes you wonder if love can truly conquer all, especially when it's built on a foundation of pain and anger like that.
That's a really good point. And speaking of pain and anger, things get even more complicated when Charlotte and Aiden discover they're mates. Basically, they're destined to be together, and they find this out right in the middle of a battlefield. And just to make things even crazier, Aiden kidnaps Charlotte. I know it's a common trope in romance, but reading about it here kind of gave me pause. It throws up some red flags, don't you think?
It definitely does. It raises some questions about whether the story is romanticizing unhealthy behaviors. Kidnapping, no matter how you look at it, is a serious issue. And to portray it as part of some passionate love story, it can be problematic. It sort of normalizes a really dangerous power dynamic. And it might even make readers more tolerant of that kind of behavior in real life.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you think about the messages we're absorbing from these stories and how they might be influencing our views on relationships. I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on the whole mate concept itself. This idea that two people are destined to be together no matter what. On the surface, it seems romantic, but it raises some interesting questions about free will and destiny, don't you think?
For sure. On one hand, it taps into that universal desire we all have for connection and belonging, that feeling that there's someone out there who's made just for you. But on the other hand, it kind of takes away the element of choice, which can be a bit unnerving, to be honest. It makes you wonder, do we really have control over our own lives and relationships? Or are we all just puppets of fate?
Yeah, it's like the universe has already made up its mind about who we're going to end up with, and we're just kind of along for the ride. I don't know about you, but I find that both really interesting and a little scary at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely has its pros and cons.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of what makes this book so interesting, It plays with those big questions and dilemmas that we all face. And it wraps it all up in this kind of supernatural package.
Right. And it's not just about the philosophical stuff either. It's also about the characters themselves and how they deal with this whole web of love and loyalty and revenge. We've got Charlotte stuck between these two warring factions. Her dad, the Alpha of the Midnight Moon Pack, and her destined mate, the Alpha of the Enemy Pack. It's like a werewolf Shakespearean tragedy.
Shakespeare with fangs. I love it. It really shows the pressure that Charlotte's under. Like, who does she side with? Her family and her pack, the people she's known her whole life, or the guy she's destined to be with, who's also like the enemy. It's that classic struggle between duty and desire. And it really makes you think about the choices we make when those two forces clash.
Right. And how those choices affect not only our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Speaking of choices, I'm curious about Aiden's character arc. We know he's driven by revenge, but the summaries also kind of suggest that he's battling with his feelings for Charlotte. What do you think? Will he choose love over revenge in the end? Or will this cycle of violence just keep going?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one that we see play out not just in the world of werewolves. We see it in our own history, in the news, in our own lives even. That desire for revenge is super powerful. And it can be so hard to break free from those cycles of violence. But I think the story is also saying that love can be a powerful force for change. Whether Aiden actually chooses love over revenge, who knows? But the fact that he's even wrestling with these feelings suggests that there's hope for redemption.
Redemption, that's a powerful word. Makes you wonder if maybe that's what this story is really all about. Not just the love story between Charlotte and Aiden, but the possibility of healing old wounds and finding a new way forward.
Yeah, I like that. And it reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the way the two packs are portrayed. You've got the Midnight Moon pack who are kind and caring, and then you have the Red Blood pack who are ruthless and vengeful. But what if those are just first impressions, like stereotypes? What if, as the story goes on, we find out that there's more to each pack than meets the eye?
Totally. Because let's be real, life is rarely black and white. There are always shades of gray and complexities that challenge our assumptions. And a story like this one, it seems, it doesn't shy away from that nuance.
Exactly. It makes you think about the stories we tell ourselves about the world,
Hmm.
about who's good and who's bad. Are those labels always right? Or are we missing a bigger piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, and maybe that's part of what makes this book so appealing, even to people who wouldn't normally be into paranormal romance. It takes these fantasy elements, werewolves, forbidden love, fated mates, and it uses them to explore really human problems.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own world, but with a little bit of magic and danger sprinkled in. It lets us confront these tough questions in a safe space, to think about different possibilities and perspectives.
And maybe to come away with a little more understanding and empathy. For ourselves and for other people, it sounds like there's so much to unpack in this book, even beyond the romance and the supernatural stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It's a story that works on so many different levels. It brings together themes of love and revenge and loyalty and identity and the fight for peace. It's a story that makes us think critically about our own beliefs and values, and to question the stories we've inherited about the world.
Wow, all of that in one paranormal romance. I'm impressed. And I bet our listener is too. What do you say we switch gears a little and dive into some of the specific plot points that stood out to you? I'm especially curious about that whole battlefield meet cute. Talk about a dramatic first encounter.
It really sets the stage for an intense and unpredictable relationship. And it also highlights one of the main things we've been talking about: destiny versus free will. On one hand, Charlotte and Aiden are fated to be together. Their connection is like predetermined beyond their control. But on the other hand, they meet on a battlefield in the middle of all this conflict and chaos, which makes it seem like their journey together is going to be anything but easy.
Yeah, it's like the story is saying, okay, you're meant to be, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a walk in the park. You're going to have to fight for your love, overcome obstacles, make choices that will shape your destiny.
Right, and those choices will have consequences, not just for them, but for their packs and maybe even for the whole werewolf world.
Which brings us back to that idea of redemption. Can their love bring peace and healing? Or will it just make the conflict even worse?
That's the suspense that keeps you reading. You want to know if love can win in the end. If these two people can escape the cycles of violence that have always defined their world.
It's such a powerful and relevant question, even outside of fiction.
Totally.
Mhm.
And that's the beauty of a good story. It lets us grapple with these complex issues in a way that's safe and engaging, to explore all the different possibilities and outcomes.
It really does make you think, huh? And it makes me think about something we were talking about earlier, that whole bad boy archetype. Aiden as like this brooding alpha werewolf who's driven by revenge. It's a trope we see all the time in romance. But it's not exactly problem-free, is it? Especially when you consider some of the things he does.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? We're drawn to these bad boy types. They're strong, they're assertive, they've got that air of mystery.
Yeah.
But those same qualities can also be signs of some not-so-great behaviors: possessiveness, aggression, sometimes even violence.
And with Aiden, we see that play out in a very real way with the kidnapping. Even though it's presented as part of this passionate, destined love story, it's still a really problematic thing to
Yeah,
do.
right. It makes you wonder how these kinds of stories affect people's expectations, especially people who are new to this genre.
Mhm.
Are we saying it's okay to ignore red flags as long as you're in love? That passion somehow makes bad behavior okay?
It's a difficult question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But I do think it's important to be aware of those messages and to think about the things we read and watch with a critical eye. Just because something seems romantic in a story doesn't mean it's healthy or acceptable in real life.
I agree with that.
Mm.
And that's where I think
Mhm.
these deep dives are so helpful. We're not just summarizing the plot. We're
Yeah.
talking about the themes, the symbols, the hidden messages. We want you to think critically and to engage with these stories on a deeper level.
Totally. So as we wrap up our look at Enemy Mate, I want to hear your final thoughts for our listener out there who's thinking about reading this book. What would you say makes it worth checking out? What are the big takeaways, even for someone who isn't a huge paranormal romance fan?
Well, I think this story has a really unique mix of fantasy romance and social commentary. It taps into our fascination with the supernatural and the appeal of forbidden love, and that classic battle between good and evil. But it also challenges us to really think about those tropes. It asks us to think about the gray areas of morality, where the line between right and wrong gets blurred, and the power dynamics that exist in our relationships.
It sounds like there's something in this book for everyone. Even if you're not usually into werewolves and romance, it's a story that starts important conversations, makes you think about your own beliefs, and maybe even leaves you with a few unanswered questions.
Exactly. And sometimes the best stories are the ones that stick with you, the ones that make you think and reflect even after you finish reading them, the ones that change the way you see the world.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
Well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into Enemy Mate. I hope you've enjoyed this journey into the world of paranormal romance, and that it's given you some things to think about. A huge thank you to you, our listener, for suggesting this deep dive. We love getting to explore new worlds and ideas with you.
Good fun.
And as always, we encourage you to keep the conversation going. Have you read Enemy Mate? What are your thoughts on the stuff we talked about today? We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on all the usual social media channels. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deeper into the worlds that you love.